Hello and welcome, my name is Carl and the channel is called Just the Way It Is, and today we're looking at Michelin's Anakee Adventure Tyre. Now this tyre is a road focused, off-road capable tyre. So if you've got an adventure bike or an adventure touring bike, the question is this a tyre that should be up high on your shopping list? Now these tyres come in a whole range of sizes. So whether you've got a Suzuki V-Strom, a Kawasaki Versys, an Africa Twin, a Tenere, or in fact the GS or any of the KTM Adventures, Michelin have a whole range of sizes to fit different bikes. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to do 3 chapters to make it easy to follow along. So the first chapter is going to be about the design of the tyre and the technology that Michelin have used. Now Michelin have been really helpful with this episode. They're not sponsoring me, I'm not supported, so these are all my own thoughts. But Michelin have been really good with supplying me with some more technical information about the design and the development of this tyre, and it's very, very interesting. And then in chapter 2, we're going to look at how you work out whether this is a tyre for you. Now the truth is, the top brands don't make bad tyres. All that can go wrong is that we, as owners of the motorbike, can make bad choices. So it's really important that we understand what the tyre is designed for, where its limitations are, and whether the tyre meets the type of riding and the type of bike that we have. So that's what we're going to cover in chapter 2. And then in chapter 3, and I'm going to leave this to last because I don't want this to interfere with the first 2 parts, and that's my own opinion of having had these tyres on this bike for over a year. Now initially I wasn't that impressed with them, but I decided to carry on and I'm pleased that I did. They've actually turned out to be quite a nice tyre, but I'll explain what I think of it, my experiences. I've done a full season on them, 7,000 kilometres. I've been on tour in the pouring rain, warm temperatures, freezing cold temperatures. So there's a lot to share about my experience with this tyre. Now I'm not your normal typical adventure tyre rider. I normally have a sports touring tyre, so it's been quite an interesting experience for me, and I'd like to share that at the end. So let's get started. Let's look at the technology that Michelin developed for this tyre. So to help us understand a bit more about these Anakee Adventure tyres, we need to go back in time just a little bit and look at 3 different tyres from Michelin's lineup. The first tyre we're going to look at is the Anakee III. Now the Anakee III was launched in February of 2013, and it was a replacement for the original Anakee II. Now the Anakee III is a single compound tyre, and it's sold as a 90% road, 10% off-road tyre, and it was and still is a hugely popular tyre. Even today in 2023 it's still a very popular tyre, and it's got a very loyal following due to its reliable, predictable performance along with great mileage. We also need to remember that the Anakee II tyre was a 70% on-road, 30% off-road tyre, or in other words, it was a more off-road focused tyre. So when they developed the Anakee III, Michelin were already taking into account the shifting new riders into the adventure market from sports and sports touring bikes. And those riders have different expectations from their bikes and from their tyres. So already back then in 2013, Michelin were well aware of the shift in the type of riders that were moving to the adventure market, and hence the Anakee III tyre was more road focused than the original Anakee II. So the next tyre we need to look at is Michelin's Anakee Wild tyre. Now this tyre was a true 50% on-road, 50% off-road tyre, and it came out in February of 2016, but it had 2 important technologies incorporated in that tyre which we need to pay attention to. So the first one was, for the first time for an off-road tyre for Michelin, they made its construction a radial type of tyre, and that gives it a big advantage when rolling over rocks and gravel so that the tyre doesn't deform. And this also helps with a true off-road tyre that isn't a radial construction. When the speed picks up, the tyre can go out of shape. As those centrifugal forces increase with speed, the tyres go out of shape and they get a bit taller. But with the radial construction, they removed that and they made it a very capable off-road and on-road tyre. Now, the second thing is bridge block technology, and this is key because that's what they're going to use later on with the Michelin Anakee Adventure Tyre. So the Anakee Wild is a single compound tyre, but this time it was heavily focused in its development for its off-road capabilities, and it is able to handle much deeper, muddier conditions, yet still provide a very good level of on-road performance. And if you go back and have a look at the reviews from 2016, the road testers that tested it off-road and on-road really couldn't believe how well this tyre performed in both of those situations. So for the development of this tyre, Michelin had an all-new compound that resists heat build-up, and it is a balance between on-road and off-road traction. It also had a new tread design with offset blocks and curved tread grooves, which provide great off-road performance on the shoulders of the tyres. Now, one of the key innovations that came with the Anakee Wild, as we mentioned earlier, is the introduction of bridge block technology. Now, this adds rigidity and stability as the bike leans over to those large blocks on the side of the tyre, and it was a huge game-changing design, and that's what we're going to find included with the Anakee Adventure. The one thing to bear in mind with the Anakee Wild tyre is these have a speed rating of R, which is a speed limit of 106 miles per hour or 160 kilometers an hour. So the last tyre we briefly need to look at is the Road 5. Now, when the Road 5 came out in 2018, it came in 3 different flavours. There was a standard, there was a GT, and there was a trail. Now, the GT was for the bigger, heavier bikes, heavier than the GS and the GSA, so they won't apply to us with the adventure bikes. But they also had a version which they called the trail. Now, the trail really was just a way to help us identify that they were for adventure bikes with a 19-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear. But here in 2023, there's now the new Road 6. So if you're searching for Road 6 Trail, you won't find it because Michelin have decided to drop the word trail from their lineup and from the description of the Road 6. But back on the Road 5, we had standard, GT and trail. It is in effect the same thing, but they've dropped off the name trail. So let's have a look at this tyre because they use a couple of new technologies that they roll forward onto these Anakee Adventure tyres. So when the Road 5 was introduced, it came with a new tread pattern. Now, Michelin called this XST Evo, which uses what Michelin call sipes and wells to disperse water quickly. Now, these sipes get progressively wider as the tyre wears, which contributes towards excellent performance in the wet. So in other words, as the tyre starts to wear down and you're halfway through the cycle of the tyre, they still perform really exceptionally well in the wet. Now, on the front of the tyre, this is where it gets interesting. Michelin use something that they refer to as 2CT technology, where the front tyre features 2 different types of all silica compound. One for the crown, let's call that the centre of the tyre, and the other compound is for the shoulder of the tyre. And they did this to ensure great handling in all situations and to combat understeer. Now, on the rear of the tyre, Michelin uses 2CT plus technology, and this is where the tyre combines an all silica compound for the crown, and yes, it is a different compound to what is used on the front with the 2CT, and this compound has a much higher concentrate of silica, and this improved compound has a greater resistance to wear. So this last part's quite important. On the shoulder of the Road 5 rear tyre, Michelin used something they refer to as all-carbon black compounds. Now, these compounds provide much superior dry weather grip at higher lean angles to provide rider enjoyment and feedback, but for this compound to work, it needs temperatures. It needs warm, hot temperatures. So now we move on to the Anakee Adventure Tyre. This tyre was launched in January of 2019. It coincided with the launch of the new R1250, GS and GSA models. Now, during the development of this tyre, Michelin had to take into account that every year these bikes are getting more powerful. Also, they had to take into account that more and more riders are moving from sports bikes and sports touring bikes into the adventure market segment, and their expectations of not only the bike but the tyres they're fitted with changes and it's very different. So they had quite a lot to take care of in the development of this tyre. Now we've looked at some of the technologies that have been used on previous models. Let's look at how they've been incorporated in the new Anakee Adventure tyre. So now we've explored some of the technologies that Michelin had developed on their previous tyres. Now we can focus on the Anakee Adventure on the bike. And I think what I'll do in a moment is I'll zoom in so we can see more clearly when I point to the different areas. We've got quite a lot going on with this tyre. Now just bear in mind when we zoom in, my tyres have done 7,500 kilometres and I'm quite hard on my front brakes. And so the bridge block technology is not so obvious to see. In fact, it's completely worn away, but my tyres are due to be replaced. And what I'll do, I'll put a picture up on the screen now so you can see what that bridge block technology looks like when the tyres are new. So let's zoom in and have a look. So this new tyre incorporates new and current technologies used within Michelin's current lineup. For example, we've already looked at bridge block technology taken from the Anakee Wild, but they also incorporated 2CT and 2CT Plus technology taken from the Road 5 and the Road 6. However, although these technologies are from earlier developments, the new tyre has a different variation of these technologies. We also need to understand the compounds that Michelin use between road and adventure tyres is different. The Anakee Adventure also has a completely new profile and tread pattern, and it's packed with the latest developments in silica compounds. And in actual fact, Michelin developed two new silica compounds specifically for this tyre. Now, these two new compounds have different flex properties when compared to the original versions, so the development team had to find a balance between the substructure, or what we would call the carcass of the tyre, with regards to flexibility and durability. And this meant that during the development of the tyre, a unique radial carcass had to be designed that would complement the new compounds and enable the development team to ultimately achieve their off-road performance goals. So why have Michelin used silica-based tread compounds rather than the all-carbon black-based compounds which they've used on the rear tyre in the Road 5? Well, that's because the silica-based compounds improve grip in cooler temperatures and on wet roads without compromising tread life. It also reduces the rolling resistance, which contributes towards much better fuel economy. Plus, there's one additional benefit, and that is it enhances durability of the outer tread blocks when the tyre is used off-road. And this is one of the main reasons why on the rear tyre, on the shoulder, Michelin uses a silica-based compound and not the all-black carbon-based compounds which you would normally find on the Road 5. One more point that you might find interesting, the Anakee Adventure tyre was not a joint development between Michelin and BMW. Michelin prefer not to make manufacturer-specific versions of a tyre because they want all riders to experience the same benefits on each tyre regardless of the bike they choose to ride. However, it is true to say that BMW were involved during the testing phase of this tyre, and that's because Michelin wanted to ensure that BMW would approve the tyre for the new R1250 GS and GSA, which also came out in January of 2019. Now, looking at the dates that we've just looked at, it's fairly clear that each time BMW release a new version of their GS, Michelin also have at the same time a new version of their tyre. So I think it's fairly clear that when the new GS 1300 comes out, possibly later this year, I would imagine that Michelin have well and truly developed and are very close to a production version of another new tyre. So when the new GS comes out, I would imagine there's either going to be an Anakee II or a different tyre of a different name. But we've got lots of things to look forward to. So, how do you decide whether this is a tyre you want to try on your adventure or your adventure touring bike? Well, there's a couple of clues in here. The first thing is, BMW, for example, they don't fit cheap tyres. They fit proper premium products to their two-wheel and four-wheel drive vehicles. And Michelin also, they don't make budget tyres. Michelin are at the very top, along with probably Michelin and Pirelli, in terms of their tyre development and the amount of time they spend developing and testing tyres. And you can be assured that when you buy one of their products, they are going to perform, providing you've picked that window of operation correctly, they're going to perform very well. Also, we need to not forget that with regards to this particular tyre and the GS, BMW spent quite a bit of time early in that testing phase making sure that they were 100% happy with the look, the design and the function and the performance of this tyre. So you've got two big important things going on then. You've got Michelin, who make some of the best tyres you can buy, and you've got BMW that don't fit cheap tyres, and they're involved with the testing phase of these tyres. So there's a couple of key things right at the beginning. Then you've also got, for example, Michelin have a really good customer helpline. All you have to do, pick up the phone, give them a ring, but the key thing, and I can't stress this enough, is to be honest about your riding experience and your capabilities, because they're going to ask you some questions about your bike and your model, how much experience you've got and the type of riding you do, and it's important that you're honest with them, and from that information that you provide them, they're going to give you some really good advice about the type of tyre that you might like to try for your bike. And then finally, Michelin have in the name the word adventure. What they don't have is off-road. So in terms of its on-road performance, it's actually quite hard to bump up to its limitations where you might want to try a different tyre. But in terms of its off-road capability, I would say in terms of road surfaces, if the tracks that you're on are dry and hard packed, you're not going to have any problems. And even with loose gravel, they still perform very well. And in fact, they do quite a good job in the wet on the gravel. I was quite surprised how much traction these tyres do provide. But that you bump up against their limitations off-road, once that surface starts to get more than about a centimetre, maybe 1.5 centimetres at maximum, of soft, wet surface, like mud, for example, and then you're going to run into the limitations of the tyre quite quickly. And in that case, if that's the type of trail or off-road riding you do, you need to be on a different tyre, and possibly within Michelin's range, it's the Anakee Wild tyre that you need to be on. And the last thing is forums. I talk about this quite often. I'm a great supporter of forums. It is a great place to go. There's lots of very experienced, informative riders that have been riding these bikes a lot longer than I have, especially these adventure bikes, and they can give you some really good advice on the type of tyres they use and the type of the terrain that they ride on. So that's another good place to go, whether you've got an Africa Twin or a Yamaha Tenere or a KTM Adventure. Go to your local forums and have a look and see what other riders think and what other riders are using. So let's move on. So here we are, 1 year later. What do I think of the tyres after doing a full season on them? Well, the first thing we should address is noise. If you've come from a different bike segment, super naked, middleweights, sports or sports touring bikes, you're in for a surprise because they do generate noise. That's not a fault of the tyre, because any off-road tyre is designed to create traction and grip. Very, very important. And the byproduct of that, because of the tread pattern and the tread block design, is going to be noise. So there is going to be, whatever tyre you choose, you're going to have a little bit of noise. So it's a little bit of a trade-off if you want that off-road capability. It's not a fault of the tyre. This is really what I want to stress. And also, a lot depends, for example, on the GS, on your height. Now you might think, what's height got to do with noise from a tyre? Well, on the GS, for example, I'm 6 foot. And it is a noisy, buffety, windy place to be. You can't get inside that nice, calm bubble of air that is there if you're a shorter rider. So if you're 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", you'll find that actually when you're riding, you're in this very calm, serene place. And then what happens is the noise from the tyre that's transmitted up through the fork tunnel, it is much more evident. And so you might find the noise from the front tyre more annoying. But for those of us that are taller, 6 foot and above, we've already got a lot of noise going on, and a little bit of tyre noise doesn't really make a lot of difference. So I hope that BMW do fix that with the new 1300. It needs to be much more capable for us taller riders, because pretty much all of us have to fit something like this to get rid of that buffeting and that noise, and it does a really good job. So that's noise. We need to forget about that now, because they're all going to, if you want off-road capability, they are all going to generate a level of noise. Now, the GS comes with 2 different tyres from 2 different manufacturers. I did spend a weekend on the Bridgestone A41s. I didn't like them. I found them more noisy than the Anakee Adventure tyres, but I think everybody has a different choice in terms of their brand of tyre. So very early on in the series, I commented that I wasn't that sure about the tyres, and I was thinking very early on about changing them and fitting something different. And I'm glad I carried on, because it's given me a chance to see what they're actually capable of. And I think in terms of choice, from BMW's perspective and the other manufacturers that fit the Anakee Adventure tyre as an OE tyre, it probably is the perfect tyre to have on the bike. So let me explain. For those of us that are coming to the adventure segment for the first time, we might be coming from sports bikes, sports touring bikes, nakeds, middleweights, wherever we're coming from, we're in for a bit of a shock, because they are incredibly capable bikes. They're very powerful, they've got more power than we could possibly want and use on the roads, and they're very, very capable. So the tyre that comes fitted on the bike from new is really important, because in that first season with the bike, it gives us the opportunity to find out whether we do actually want to go off-road. And this tyre does cope very well with, and I touched on this earlier on, with dry, hard-packed surfaces and even loose gravel. When that surface gets to more than about 1 centimetre and it's wet and squidgy and there's mud or wet grass, it's not very good. But that's not what the tyre's for. The tyre really is for, and I think BMW and Michelin combined got this right, to give us the opportunity in our first season with these new bikes to find out what we want to do. Do we want to stay in that triangle of 80% road focus, 20% off-road focus, so that we can, when we go on tour, when we go out with our friends, if we pass a lane and we think, what's down there, we can with confidence go and explore. But in our first year, if we don't do that and we don't want to go off-road at all, we've then got the choice to fit a more 100% road-focused tyre. Now, in Michelin's case, that's going to be the Road 6, which is an incredibly capable tyre. Or if in your first year you actually like spending time off-road, you're probably better off fitting something that's more capable, because we've talked about this 1 centimetre of soft stuff and then it kind of runs into its limits. Then you would fit something, and in the Michelin range you've got the Anakee Wild, and of course there are a whole range of other tyres depending on where you live on your continent, what type of weather you've got. Is it dry, is it wet, is it really muddy, are you in Wales and Scotland? Then there's lots of other tyre choices that you can make. But for the first tyre, when it's new, I think it's probably the perfect tyre, and I think Michelin and BMW combined have actually got it perfect as a first tyre. So wear, mileage, they're very good. I'm generally very heavy on my front brakes. Coming from sports bikes and sports touring bikes, I brake generally quite late for corners. So my front tyre's finished and I need to change it. But the rear tyre, when we take into account that this is the size of the engine, 1250 cc's, it generates a huge amount of torque. I'm really surprised how well that rear tyre has held up. So Michelin did a really good job with that silica compound in the crown of the tyre on the rear. It's lasted really well. Now, normally I would never think about changing just one tyre. I would always fit 2. It's a bit more expensive when another tyre is only part worn, but on this occasion, I would actually, if I was going to keep the tyres, I would fit another new front tyre and then do another season, because that rear tyre really is only just about half worn, probably not even that. And I think, looking at the shape and the profile, it's still got a good year left in it. And if I match it with a new front tyre, I'm going to be fine for another season. So what do I think of the tyres in general? Well, at the beginning of the season, at the beginning of the series, for example, I was a little concerned because they don't warm up like a traditional sports touring tyre. And I was a bit concerned because after 10, 12 minutes on a sports touring tyre, get off and feel your temperature, they're warm. This doesn't happen with the Anakees. They never really ever get warm. They sort of get some temperature in them, but they never feel hot like a sports touring tyre does. well, not hot, but that warm feeling. And so I was a little disappointed with that, but they're actually quite good. I was in Norway earlier this year on tour. It rained quite a lot, and one of the days we went over the Geiranger National Park into the valley, and it was 2.5 degrees. The lakes were still partly frozen on the top, there was snow everywhere, and the tyres performed really well. Even in those low temperatures, with these silica-based compound tyres, the grip was really quite amazing, and I was really surprised how well at those low temperatures, even though I'm concerned about them not warming up, how well they performed. So in that regard, they've done really very well. Very well. One of the limitations I find is, and this is not going to affect a lot of riders, is with regards to lean angle, how much lean angle you're happy with riding a bike. We're all different, and it doesn't mean you're a good rider or a bad rider, or what you're confident doing. So between vertical and about 45 degrees, these tyres are predictable and really good, and I have no complaints. They perform very similar to a sports touring tyre up until about 45 degrees. But from that point on, 45 degrees through to about 49, 50, there's something missing. They don't communicate with the rider. You can't really feel what's going on, and because the rear profile, the tyre actually drops off quite quickly on the sides. When you get to that sort of lean angle, when you want a little bit more, the bike actually drops in quite quickly into the corner. So you have to be really aware of what you're doing. And I find it quite hard to hustle along quickly after about 45 degrees. So I'm hoping that when I change my tyres, which I'm going to do very soon, in fact next week, the next tyre I fit will give me that little bit more confidence with those greater lean angles for a bit more sporty riding. So in general, I think the tyres are the perfect tyre to fit from new. They give us lots of opportunity to experience what the bike's capable of, and then after that first year, you just have to decide, do you want to stay in that V-shaped triangle right at the very beginning that we talked about with the 80% road, 20% off-road, so you've got those options to go exploring those gravel lanes, or do you want to go more off-road, or do you want 100% road-focused tyre? So I think as an original tyre, it's very good. So I hope this episode has helped. I think a lot of people, for you that do like the option of going off on a tour, finding a lane and thinking, oh, what's down there, and going off and exploring, the Anakee Adventure Tyre is a really, really good option, and still in the marketplace, it possibly is the best one to have to give you those options and that flexibility. Anyway, I'll see you soon. I've got more information to come about the tyres I'm going to be fitting, and that will be in another episode coming up soon. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.